tum, tarum, ta, tum, tarum, ta, tum, tarum, ta, or alternatively, tum, ta, ta, tum, ta, ta, ta. Variations of this beat. Whenever people, especially from a Western cultural background, who are mostly limited to pop music, whenever they hear the many variations of this beat, their first reaction is to think of reggaeton, usually. And then following this association with reggaeton, the imagery, the lexicon of imagery that tends to be associated in people's minds with this beat tend not to be heroic ancient medieval folk ballads about great warriors or great love stories, certainly not spiritual music that expresses the oneness of humans with God. No, usually people upon hearing this, they will instead tend to think of scantily clad girls in bikinis shaking their asses in a very over-sexualized manner. Basically, whenever people hear this tum, turum, ta, tum, turum, tum beat, they cannot accept that it can be of a serious nature, of a profound nature, of a deep civilizational or historical or epic nature. No, this must be lowly music about sexuality and cars and everything. The problem is this Duchesse, stop being in front of the camera. The problem is this beat that we've described is not unique to reggaeton, and it certainly was not originated by reggaeton. In fact, it is a beat that is found across a plurality of different cultures. I can attest that it mostly operates within the continuum of the Mediterranean, starting from Spain, North Africa, the Balkans, Greece, the Middle East. Within this continuum, this beat is absolutely everywhere. This percussional pattern can be found within the music of those cultures, and mind you, not the pop mainstream music of those cultures, but the old, ancient, traditional music of those cultures. We are talking about ancient traditional music of villages and everything.
Boom, ba boom, 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 ba boom, boom. We have that in Crete. We have it all over Greece. You have it all over the Balkans as well. Middle East, holy shit, they use that nonstop.
In Anatolia, the Sufis are the Muslims who approach Islam from its mystical dimension. They enter these musical trances called zikr, through which they can feel the oneness of God. The foundational principal percussional beat in Sufi Anatolian rituals is that reggaeton rhythm, and they emit it through their breaths. Once again, these are not influencers. These are not people who decided to adopt reggaeton because they thought it sounded cool. These far predate reggaeton, and they come out of traditional cultures from around the world. The problem is a lot of people cannot accept that mentally. There's a cognitive dissonance that happens. A lot of people, upon hearing this beat, they have to believe that it comes from reggaeton, and so very often they'll click on one of my videos and one of my songs that I post on my channel. For example, I can speak from my own experience because I get a lot of these kind of comments. They'll see a song that has a historical theme or whatever, and they'll go, oh lol, what the fuck, it's a reggaeton rhythm? Because they literally think that because they've only ever heard it in reggaeton, they can't entertain the notion that just because they only heard it in reggaeton doesn't mean that it only exists there or that it originated there. But then you have some of the people who, whilst they can understand intellectually that, yes, reggaeton does not have a monopoly on this beat and certainly is not the origin of this beat, they still have a very hard time processing that. They have a hard time vibing, if you will, or accepting the validity of music, feeling the validity of music that to them thematically does not match the, again, imagery lexicon that they have associated, that they've been conditioned to associate with this beat. Because this beat is primarily tied to genres of music that typically do not have very high philosophical meanings, typically do not have very philosophical lyrics, and tend to be, about cars or whatever, and mamacita, and, half-naked girls and everything. that beat sounds like that to them. Like that beat evokes this. And this goes back to a video that I made previously called What Does War Music Sound Like to Us, in which I analyze how we human beings will literally be conditioned to associate certain musical sounds, be it a beat, be it a melody, be it a scale or an instrument, whatever. We will associate these with certain realities so strongly that upon hearing this literally feels like half naked girls and rapping about having the best Mercedes or whatever. That's how strong our ability to associate things with very abstract musical concepts is. But I talk about the fact that in this video, the title of that video is What Does War Music Sound Like? It depends on the culture. And the whole point of the video is, things that sound like war music to one culture may sound like love music to another culture and vice versa. There's this South Indian piece of music that I uploaded on my channel. I took this piece of medieval Tamil poetry from South India and I gave it to a South Indian musician. And I told her, I want you to compose a piece of music based on this epic poetry that is about a great war between two clashing kingdoms going back to the Middle Ages. I want you to compose South Indian classical music to it. I want you to write music that feels like war, not based on the Western Hollywoodian parameters of what sounds like war. I want you to use the internal logic of what you associate with war. And that's what she gave me. I didn't tell her anything. I didn't tell her I want this scale or that scale. I just told her it has to sound like war based on whatever your culture thinks sounds like war. This is the result that it gave us. Oh, but it doesn't sound like war. Not to you. We get conditioned. That's the thing. I think it takes a lot of maturity, and I think this is where you can really delineate people who are open-minded from those who really are stuck in their social conditioning. You can tell how stuck in their social conditioning somebody is if they are completely unable to accept that this only sounds like war because they've been conditioned to associate it with war or grandeur or combat or bravery or whatever. My point is, when music evokes something to our ears, it's almost 99% completely culturally subjective. It always changes from culture to culture, meaning that in an alternate universe, it is entirely possible that the course of events that slowly led to the aggregation of our associations of this sound with war, it is entirely possible that in an alternate universe, we would have heard this in 2026 and said, that sounds like love, that sounds like romantic, and that this would have sounded like bloodlust and darkness to us. These things are entirely culturally conditioned, or at least almost entirely culturally conditioned. Again, I talk about that more in this video, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about this reggaeton thing because it is really one of the main sticking points that people have a hard time accepting. It's very hard for people to properly accept traditional music because I very often get comments by people saying, I know this beat is traditional, I know it's ancient, but I just can't help it. It doesn't feel like it fits a heroic ballad about an ancient Greek medieval hero or whatever. Music from another culture that deals with a certain theme, the kind of sounds that it uses to deal with that theme do not always match with our preconceived notions of what musical sounds match this theme for us. As for the history and everything, I'm not really going to go into an ethnomusicological analysis of this beat and everything because I know some people will be like, well, what is the origin of this beat? What is its history? We don't know. It's a percussional beat. Percussional patterns are not really written down in history and everything. We can't really trace their history. And I think thinking of what is its origin? Where did it come from? That's a bit of a naive question, I think. This percussional pattern is found across the world, and I mean literally across the world in different continents to the point that it's almost comparable to something like the pentatonic major, for example. The pentatonic scale is found in so many different disparate cultures that are completely disconnected from one another to the point where you have to assume for it a plurigenetic model rather than a monogenetic model. What is monogenesis? Monogenesis in anthropology is when you assume that something had one singular origin in time and in space, and any other occurrences of that thing must originally go back to that one emergence. Whereas Plurigenesis, on the other hand, a plurigenetic model is when you assume that this thing emerged in different places at different times independently. And usually, the main thing that distinguishes, that makes us go plurigenetic instead of monogenetic, is, is this like an instinctive human thing? Is, how complex is this thing? If it's like a highly specific thing, yeah, you usually want to go for monogenesis, but we're talking about a duple meter pattern. Duple meter is the most statistically prevalent across humanity, and once you have a duple meter time signature, there's only so many permutations, there's only so many patterns that you can do within it. There's certainly many that you can do, but it's not endless. So yeah, I don't think the Japanese have that pattern because they got it from the Mesopotamians in the Ice Age. I think it's silly. I think it's just like you can count that other people will just get it from one another at different points in time, independently from one another. And so when we find this percussional pattern in reggaeton music, I don't think it's because reggaeton invented it or whatever. I think it's because, what are the three main cultures of those regions? Let's say there's the natives of those regions, who intermingled with the European Spanish and with the African slaves, for example. We know that many African cultures, especially the African cultures from the regions that would end up becoming the bulk of the demographic that would be displaced and brought to these colonies and everything, those Africans had those beats. The natives, we know that this beat exists in a lot of Native American music, including of Central and Southern America and the Caribbean and everything. And the Spanish, the European white Spanish, also have this. Because I know a lot of people think, oh, this is an exotic non-white beat, but it's certainly not European bullshit. It's as European as it gets. Plenty of European cultures have it. It's not going to conform to their idea of what European musical identity is. But that's nonsense. It's a very European beat. Literally, the Spanish have it in very old traditional music. And so if we look at the emergence of this beat within reggaeton, I don't think it's because, oh, it's the Africans, or it's this. No, I think it's literally every single culture that coalesced there and, formed music. And eventually that traditional music that they had ended up informing the mainstream music that became reggaeton. I think it's because like every single culture that intermingled there, they all had this beat. So I think we have to be very careful not to think about this in terms of who invented this beat and where does it come from. I think it's one of those things that's just going to emerge in different places at different times just because, it's a pretty basic pattern that's very danceable and it's a duple meter. So statistically, the chances are very high for it to emerge in different places at different times. Now, the note that I want to end this video on, because again, there's really not much to say from a musicological point of view. What is its history and everything? It's a percussional pattern. It just emerged in different places at different times. But the note that I want to finish this video on is traditional music doesn't always conform to our pop cultural assumptions of what sounds traditional. I remember I released a song about 2 years ago, I want to say. It was a cappella, save for drums. And the drums did this beat. Tum, da tum, da tum, da tum, tum, which very much matches, again, the ethnomusicological reality of where that culture was from and everything. And then some doofus in the comments, this is modern, these are just reggaeton drums, and they sound epic, and it's fake, because he thinks that loud drums are like epic drums, and that they're an invention by Hollywood, which is stupid. Plenty of cultures traditionally have had very powerful epic sounding drums, and he said it's a reggaeton rhythm, this is stupid. And he goes, I want to hear rattles and bagpipes and lyres and toggle harpas and harps. And he just like says that, this is fake because this doesn't sound traditional. And he starts linking videos like this artist, for example. Saying like, this is what I want to hear when I want traditional music. Now, the irony, of course, is this is not at all traditional music. This is what you would call neo-folk, neo-pagan kind of genres of music. There's a Persian sitar, there's this. It's just a mishmash of a bunch of different instruments from a bunch of disparate cultures. In a very colorful and creative manner, but this is effectively sort of fusion music, and there's almost nothing traditional about this. But unfortunately, you have a genre of music that I have no problem with the existence of this genre of music, but it's sort of the Warjuna type of music, or this type of like neo-pagan or pseudo-medieval whatever music bardcore kind of music. I don't know exactly what the genre of this music is, but it's people just shoving together a bunch of different instruments that sound traditional or have a traditional vibe. But it's all really about vibes at the end of the day. And actually, there's nothing traditional about it. It's just a very colorful mishmash. And a lot of people respond to that as traditional, but a cappella song with a tum, tum, tum kind of beat, they will reject that as modernized, thinking that the other stuff is traditional. Why? Because they just hear a bunch of old sounding instruments, and because there's a lot of old sounding instruments, clearly that must be more real and traditional. Whereas this is just a bunch of drums and they play a reggaeton rhythm. Clearly, this must be fake and modernized. Like, well, this sounds and feels traditional, but what they think sounds and feels traditional is informed entirely by pop cultural media, which itself is divorced from traditionality. Things that are truly traditional do not always conform to our preconceived ideas of traditionality, certainly not our ideas of traditionality that have been fed to us by Hollywood and pop culture conditioning. I remember there was this song that I recently, sort of deconstructed by this AI music channel where he still pretends, by the way, to make traditional music rooted in actual traditions and authenticity and everything. And he called this a medieval Orthodox chant. And what I explained was that, like, literally everything about this song is not authentic or traditional to, like, the Byzantine, Greek, civilizational continuum, except for the beat. And I can guarantee you most people will hear that beat and they'll be like, oh, that's the modern stuff. No, like, that's literally the only part of that song that's actually authentic to Greek, very traditional music and civilization and everything. So my point with this being, we have to be very careful not to assume that we know what sounds traditional based solely on vibes or purely its sound, because we have been conditioned falsely to assume that some things are more modern and not. So the reggaeton beat is actually a very traditional, very old, ancient rhythm and everything. And if you encounter it in other cultures, it's I think it's important to do the mental exercise of accepting that just because you and I may associate it with half naked girls does not mean therefore that it invalidates the cultural validity of Greeks or Muslims using that same beat for themes and purposes that are very different and divorced from that. Anyway, this was a quickie. I don't have much else to say. This was Faria Fariji, and I bid you farewell. Goodbye.